Hello, welcome once again to Lehto's Law. You know, a couple days ago, I did a video and I mentioned some things going on in Florida, and I had a couple people contact me and say, Steve, you're always picking on Florida. And I said, well, I got to go where the stories are. I can't take a story from Florida and say it happened in Nevada. But if a story is newsworthy, I'll cover it. I don't care where it takes place. If it's important to the story, I'll point it out where it happened, but I just also point out when, things happen, where they happen, because that's often part of the story. So just so you know that I'm an equal opportunity reporter, I'm going to tell you about the crazy cat lady in Michigan. Okay? There you go. Crazy cat lady in Michigan. And of course, if you watch The Simpsons, you know that the crazy cat lady is a regular character on the show. And Simpsons, of course, takes place in what state? We don't know. But Michigan woman is charged with animal cruelty after 88 cats are found living in inches deep feces inside her squalid home. And we'll get to the bottom of this. A Michigan woman has been charged with animal cruelty after 88 cats and one dog. You always hear about these families with like 5 boys and 1 girl, 6 girls and 1 boy. 88 cats and 1 dog. That dog was so outnumbered. I feel sorry for him already. A court bailiff made the discovery when he arrived at the 62-year-old's Mount Clemens address late last month to issue her with an eviction notice. I grew up in Michigan, and I've always been aware of the place called Mount Clemens, and yet no one knows why it's named that because there's no mount there as far as we know. It's pretty much flatland as far as the eye can see. So if someone knows the origin of the name Mount Clemens, please let me know. I could look it up, but I'm a busy man. The bailiff went there to serve her with an eviction notice. Animal control was subsequently called to the property where they removed the animals, most of whom unfortunately were in bad health. And this is the problem. There are people out there, it's obviously a mental disorder when you start hoarding animals, okay? And on the one hand, it's a mental disorder, but on the other hand, it's also cruel to the animals, and that's the real sad part of the story here. Many of the cats were extremely ill, but were taken to the local animal control center. County prosecutor Eric Smith shared a photo showing the inside of the property with a bedroom floor covered in animal feces. A small number of the cats, unfortunately, had to be put down because they were so ill, according to the Detroit Free Press. And this story I saw at several places. I'm reading to you from the Daily Mail simply because that's where I found the story here, but it also is reported in the Detroit Free Press, which I'll point out to you, I delivered as a child. I was a paperboy before I was a tow truck driver. Many of the other felines were inbred and pregnant. Macomb County Animal Control Chief Jeff Randazzo told ABC News that the woman's 3-bedroom home was small and that the cats did not have access to the yard. So these are all indoor cats, all 88 of them, and the dog. Last Thursday, county prosecutor showed the photograph, and a Facebook post shared last week revealed that almost all of the kittens have now been rehomed. So apparently the 88 cats, the ones that survived, have been redistributed. Randazzo claims that there were piles of feces throughout the house, which were often inches deep. A cleanup crew was forced to wear hazmat suits while fumigating the property. Now, here's the thing. Reading between the lines here, it was an eviction notice being served on her. So this isn't her house. She's the tenant. So in this story, if we're going to list the order and the victims in it, you've got 88 cats. You have that poor dog. And you've got the poor landlord who's got to do something about this house that has floors now covered with feces. The woman was hospitalized for an infected cat bite. Gee, I wonder how she got that. She was initially reluctant to waive ownership of the animals, claiming that she was running a cat sanctuary and that most of the felines were feral before she had housed them. And again, she might have believed that. She might have believed that. And you have to ask yourself, if there is a feral cat, a cat living in the wild, a cat that was born in the wild and has never had human contact, it's possible that that's where these cats came from. I've known people who've had cats show up in their neighborhood. They don't know where the cat came from. They start feeding the cat. There's a cat. Boom, So somehow she acquired quite a few cats, but the problem is when you acquire a few cats, they can then reproduce and become more cats. The cats were taken to the local animal control shelter and, like I said, were being adopted out. And meanwhile, in case you're curious about that poor dog, The woman's dog has been transported to Florida to live with her brother, referring, I guess, to the woman in the house. So, again, like I said, a woman who is being evicted from her home in Mount Clemens, Michigan, 88 cats and one dog removed from the house, and they're now in there with hazmat suits cleaning the place up. And that's the crazy cat lady of Mount Clemens. So, like I said, if the story happens, I don't care where it happens, I'll tell you about it. But that, unfortunately, is the kind of thing you hear about too often. And, what happens is somebody who thinks they're doing the good deed, bringing the cats in or the dog in or whatever, and it takes somebody, an unbiased third party to look at it and go, oh my God, this is crazy. So if they hadn't evicted her when they had, come back next year, it could be 150 cats, 200 cats, whatever. And eventually, of course, they'd kill her and eat her. But it didn't get that far, so that's what we're looking at. So she's been charged with animal cruelty, which is, of course, a crime. And we'll see how that shakes out. And like I said, I feel really, really bad for the landlord whose house this is, because presumably he's going to want to try to clean it up, fix it, and re-rent it to somebody, which might be difficult to do. Now, I've had several people ask me about my t-shirts, and I point out that many of them are just shirts I own because I like them. I'm wearing this shirt, however, as a protest, because this is the logo for the Finnish hockey team. The Finnish hockey team, Finland, the country, has a hockey team, and they're very, very good. And both the men's team and the women's teams are good. And I was watching this past weekend the Finnish women's hockey team playing the U.S. hockey team. And the U.S. hockey team is also, of course, very good. And in fact, the U.S. hockey team dominates at the Olympics and World Championship level. And they're just steamrolling all their opponents. And they were playing in the finals in Finland, where the championships were being held this past weekend. And the Finns made it to the finals. And so it's the Finns versus the U.S. hockey team. And the game went into the end of the third period as a 1-1 tie, and they had an overtime. And then, of course, if the overtime doesn't resolve it, it's going to be a shootout. And in the overtime, the Finns scored a goal. And it's sudden death. So there's pandemonium on the ice, mayhem, as people are celebrating, screaming, yelling, because this is the game that they just won on home ice, the World Championship. They just defeated the Americans. And, I'll admit, in this setting, I normally would be rooting for the Americans, but when it's the Finns, I got to root for the Finns. Many people forget that at Lake Placid, when we beat Russia, the U.S. beat Russia, that wasn't the gold medal game. The gold medal game was next, where the U.S. played Finland. But I digress. So, with respect to the game that I just told you about this past weekend, Finland scored a goal. Place goes nuts. And for some odd reason, one of the referees goes over to the penalty box and over where they discuss things with the officials. And they're all whispering, and the guy's got a headset. And it turns out that they've introduced instant replay, to international hockey. And I've always said that, on the one hand, I've seen some plays that were fixed by instant replay. And I've also seen some plays that weren't fixed because they didn't have instant replay. The best example, of course, is the no-hitter in the Detroit Tigers game. And forgive me for forgetting the guy's name, but he was one out from a no-hitter, and the first base ump blew a call and said the guy was safe when the guy was out. I was actually traveling. I was in another country, and that story was in the news. Watch this blown call ruin this guy's no-hitter. And I was watching the news in a country where they didn't play baseball, and it was a big deal. So I understand the point behind instant replay. But the weird thing is that after like 10 minutes, so it's not instant replay, it's delayed replay. After 10 minutes, the ref comes out and indicates no goal. But then they indicate a penalty on the Americans. And because you'll know, of course, that in football, the referee will face one side and indicate what the call is. It could be holding or whatever. And they indicate with their hands what's going on, and at least you know what the call is. And they'll often say who the call is on, holding on number 33, whatever. And we all know that in baseball, umpires make calls, but they don't have to explain them. There's the famous World Series game in St. Louis where there was a walk-off obstruction call, where a guy got thrown out at the plate, but the home plate umpire called him safe because there had been obstruction at third base. And again, people went nuts. But if you watched the replays, it was a good call. I'm sure there's people out there who don't think so. But my point is that once in a while they get it right, once in a while they get it wrong. And the weird thing is they showed this call from every possible angle. And there was no justification for it as far as anybody could see, especially because if they're going to call a penalty on the Americans. Because remember, in hockey, it's the game where if there's a penalty and it's the team without the puck, a referee will raise his hand but not blow his whistle to indicate that when the possession changes, he's going to blow his whistle, but it will allow the team with the puck to potentially do something. And if they scored, for instance, then the penalty simply won't get called. So it was a very, very strange call. I think it was a horrible call. And it was sad because it went against Finland, which in that case, I was rooting for them. So that's why I'm wearing the shirt. But again, has nothing to do with the 88 Cats in Mount Clemens. But that was in Michigan. So just so you know, the stories I tell, I'm not picking on Florida. I'm not picking on California. I'm just picking on whoever it is that's in the news with 88 cats and a dog because they deserve it. Questions or comments, put them below. Otherwise, talk to you later. Bye-bye.